Regardless of who you supported in the presidential race this year, there's a lot to talk about as we look forward to the new Trump administration. Our Line Opinion panelists are ready to share their take on what the national election results might mean for New Mexico. I'm joined this week by retired UNM political science professor Christine Sierra, who is also an author in the newly released book, Contested Transformation, Race, Gender, and Political Leadership in the 21st Century America. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, Gene.
Merritt Allen is here from Vox Optima LLC. Our friend Andy Lyman, a reporter with NM Political Report, and Laura Sanchez-Rive, one of our regulars and an attorney at Cuddy and McCarthy LLC. Now, Christine. P, thank you. Sorry, it's a big difference, actually. Big difference, actually. Christine Sierra, a lot of reflection since Tuesday, certainly. As we tape this, President-elect Trump has just met with President Obama in the White House, and they had their press conference. As we sit here, and a whole lot has taken place, I'm sure, by the time we sit here on Friday night when this airs, but your general take on what happened this past election, a whole lot of folks didn't get accounted for, apparently, that went to the polls and voted for Mr. Trump. Were you surprised by that?
Are you talking about it here in the state?
No, nationwide.
Nationwide.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I don't know about that particular angle. That just would then add to the pot of many questions.
That's right.
So what we've got are many questions, few answers, and we're going to be spending a little bit more time over the next several weeks trying to find those answers. But I could say this.
Yep.
I think there's two major things guiding our discussions and our emotional moods these days. One is explain how it was such a surprise, what accounts for that, and then also what did Trump do really well to win.
Right.
And I would like to just say that on the first part, the polling industry clearly fell on its face.
Sure.
And I would just add that there are a number of ways in which one could point to mistakes made or problems that were not really resolved, but methodology and looking at appropriate samples, and when you do random sampling in polls, can be problematic. And I would want to point to one particular issue is Latino voting.
Gotcha.
And right now, the national news is saying that Latino voting for Hillary Clinton went down, and Trump actually got more than Romney. And we know from Latino Decisions data, my colleagues in political science run that firm, that that's not true at all. So I'm here to say that the true estimate is 79% of the Latino vote went for Hillary Rodham Clinton. And Trump got only about 18%. And that's actually improving the Latino vote over what it did for Barack Obama in 2008.
That is fascinating because, Laura, as the numbers start to trickle in a little bit here, the undercounts in certain states. But at the same time, what happened for Mrs. Clinton that everyone thought this was in the bag for weeks and weeks and weeks leading up to this? Do you have a sense of what might have happened at the end there?
Well, I mean, one thing I will say about the Latino vote and that I find problematic, and I'm not sure a lot of the national pollsters or national media really pick up on, is it's not a monolithic group.
Right.
So, and it's very regionalized. So in certain states, you can see trends where, I mean, here in New Mexico, certainly a trend's Democratic. There's other parts of the Southwest and in California, where the Latino vote means Democratic votes. But in Florida, Latino votes mean Cuban votes, and those are Republican votes.
Yeah.
So when we see, well, a lot of Cubans are still
They were
largely
almost evenly split, the Cuban Americans. 47% for Rodham Clinton and 51, something like that.
right. But what I'm saying is that they were split versus having a majority Democratic.
But when you add the non-Cuban Latinos, they are Democratic. And so the Florida Latino electorate is fascinatingly diverse.
But that still means that when you had brown people voting here in New Mexico, you have a turnout that means Democratic.
Right.
When you have brown people in Florida, you're talking about folks that are there's way more Republicans than you have in other states.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't know that sort of detail has come up, has been discussed as much as it should. The other thing that happened, I mean, she just didn't connect with white blue-collar workers in the industrial states, where in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, places like that, she just wasn't connecting with that demographic. And that was a huge demographic that has traditionally voted Democrat, has
Reliably, sure.
reliably strong union vote,
That's right.
and it just didn't happen for her. And
Did you all catch that Michael Moore thing quite a few months ago about how Mr. Trump was going to win this thing at the end of the day? Do you remember that? And that's exactly the strategy he pointed out a year ago, that Mr. Romney was going to go right through those states. He didn't even open a campaign office, Merritt Allen, in a couple of those states and won them. That's an amazing thing when you think about it. No ground game, no anything up there. Let me ask you, though, Merritt, for Republicans, was there a huge surprise? I mean, for Democrats, a huge surprise, but for Republicans, was this a giant, like, oh my gosh, we actually pulled this off? A sense of that?
Well, I think it depends on where you got your information about the election.
Okay.
And to me, this election on a national level had a couple key themes. One, what I call post-truth politics, where information sites, not news sites, that are biased a specific way, that are very well calculated to resound with the demographic they're trying to reach. Two examples I'll give you. Breitbart, Occupy Democrats. Breitbart sounds like Brett Baier, Bloomberg. Yeah, that sounds real. That sounds like something I want to hear as a conservative. Okay, Breitbart.
Right.
Occupy Democrats. Yeah, I want to change. I'm a progressive. That's stuff I want to hear. Neither of those sites are at all required to be based in fact, and they do not purport to be. But what happens is you see somebody posting that on Facebook, and you're like, hey, I agree with that sentiment, and it's from so-and-so who I think is smart, and it says Breitbart, so that must be true, and you post it.
Right.
And so a lot of people built their opinions on the two candidates based on completely fabricated information and just emotional responses generated by rather cynical websites. The other piece, I think that may have caught Republicans by surprise is that we were going by polls, and two things blew up Tuesday night: traditional media and traditional polling. And Cambridge.
Do you think folks made up their mind in the last 24 hours to come home, so to speak, in quotes, to Mr. Trump? Do you think there were a lot of Republicans out there who had heard everything, the Access Hollywood stuff, all that stuff? They had a lot of problems with the man. But at the end of the day, when push came to shove, it was about, or itch came to scratch, as a friend of mine said on Facebook, you were going to come home to Republicans. Do you think that's what happened there in the last little bit of time?
I don't.
Okay.
I think many Republicans and establishment Republicans, we saw this at the highest levels, could not bring themselves to support Trump. We saw this with our own governor. The number, and people didn't really want to admit they were voting for Trump.
Yes.
How many Trump signs have you seen in New Mexico?
That's right.
Almost none. And that's also with elected officials not wanting to grandstand that. So I think there was a surprise. I think core Republicans or establishment Republicans, whatever you want to call them, were expecting an unusual outcome on Tuesday, but didn't know what it was going to be.
Fair enough. Yeah, exactly. Andy, good to see you, by the way. Thanks for being here. I know you've been working hard, and one of the things you were covering was Gary Johnson. You had gone to the Libertarian Convention, party convention back when. You were also, I believe, at the party headquarters for the election night party.
Yeah, it was the Gary Johnson Watch Party, Johnson Weld's Watch Party. So,
what happened for Mr. Johnson this cycle? What do you think happened there?
there's a lot of stuff that happened. I think there's actually some blame from Democrats right now, looking at the Libertarian Party saying you stole the vote. I'm not sure that there's enough data to show that actually happened. Mm-hmm. He got the Libertarian Party just that one step farther, and I think that the hope is that they're going to just the long game, right, to get the Libertarian Party closer and closer to major party status.
Right. Interesting. Now, I want to talk about some things about the effect of this candidacy on the state of New Mexico. Certainly, that's why we're all here. And Christine, Sierra, we got an email here at the station from our colleague Tom Garrity. Asked a very interesting question yesterday. What happens to things like all the work we've done down south, especially Governor Martinez with getting the border, Senator Essa, all that kind of thing? That's highly tied to NAFTA. That's highly tied to Maquilador. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What
I know
happens
what you
with
mean.
that?
That's
Sure.
a really important question. Mm-hmm. We don't know the answer. Like many things on the Trump agenda, we know what the rhetoric suggests.
Right.
The rhetoric suggests seeing a border that separates, a fortified border that separates the U.S. and Mexico. Right. And what does that mean for the sister cities and for the sister states?
Right.
We know the reality is intertwined relationships, codependency in terms of business. I mean, El Paso, for example, my hometown, depends on shoppers from Mexico to stay alive in those downtown areas. And border communities across the Southwest were not pleased with the Trump rhetoric. So, Jean, what happens is very, very important. Perhaps prominent Republicans down south can convince the President-elect Trump to say, look, we cannot build this wall figuratively or literally to pretend that we have no relationships, because we do, and business is one of them.
That's right. Pick up on that if you would, Laura Sanchez Rivey. I mean, there's ramifications for any election, for gosh sake. But would you anticipate us having problems with the Trump administration here in New Mexico?
Well, I think it depends if he follows through with what he's been saying. I mean, his rhetoric has just been so anti-immigrant. He's said so many nasty things about, people of color, bad hombres and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I just think that a lot of people in this region have definitely found that distasteful and are afraid of what he actually might do. I also, though, on the other hand, saw something this morning on TV about somebody who knew him well talking about how that was just the political, the politician, the campaigning Donald Trump. The actual Donald Trump that comes in and governors as the administration, the executive will be totally different and will be softer about a lot of things. Well, and that sort of begs the question, well, how is his base who actually elected him going to take that? What kind of, people being upset on the other side. Right now we see protests against Trump around the country. Once he starts not following through with everything he's talked about, everything from prosecuting Hillary Clinton to putting up a wall and forcing Mexico to pay for it, how much of that will make those people really upset on the other side?
That's a good
So
point.
I think we're going to see some of that if he doesn't follow through.
That's a good point. Merritt, we talked about this Tuesday night during our election coverage live here on New Mexico PBS, that we have a sitting governor, who was not a fan of Mr. Trump and was not a fan early on. Is there a problem there for us because of that?
I don't think so. I think where that really plays out is you see that in the state races, because the Republican campaigns were disconnected very quietly, didn't talk about it. It was kind of a genteel understanding that these folks were supporting Trump and these folks weren't, and they all had their super PACs and went out in their separate ways. I don't think an executive order could really hurt New Mexico. I think our legislators legislative delegation and Congress in general, they're going to have to find a way, even though they may be of the same party in the majority, they're going to have to find a way to work with this president and enact some of his policies. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're going to have to, what we will see is there will have to be some compromise. You can't write an executive order and build a wall. You really can't. So unless he gets buy-in in Congress, which I think is very doubtful, I just don't think it's possible.
Right. Andy, pick up on that if you would too. The relationship between a president and a governor, well, do we make a little too much of that? Do you know what I mean? It's not as if presidents are checking up on governors every day and taking a nose count, right?
And I would imagine she's not a huge fan of our current president either, right? So there's a disconnect there.
That's right.
But I think Merritt's right there that he's either going to have to pad his administration with some GOP advisors or something there so that he can properly, make executive orders or push legislation.
Is there opportunity perhaps in a Trump presidency for New Mexico, military, the bases? Is there a possibility there we might come up on the upside here?
I think, again, I think it's really early to say anything. We're going to have to see what happens in the next couple months when he starts to ease his way into the White House.
It's all such a guess now, isn't it, right now?
Yeah.
What will be interesting is to what extent will Steve Pearce be a player? I mean, he represents the border area.
Right.
He's done some legislation on trying to deal with cross-border commerce and traffic with the congressman from El Paso area, and he was for Trump. So I don't know if his congressional district can carry that much weight in the broad scheme of things, but Steve Pearce is a Republican who was loyal to Trump.
Right, exactly.
And he's from that area.
Yeah.
The one thing, Jean, I will say is that, having Trump in that position, and what scares, I think, a lot of environmentalists the most is that, just as you could do a lot in terms of the environment through executive order, I mean, we got the the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks as a national monument, Rio Grande, del Norte as a national monument. Just as you could do that through executive order, there's a lot that can be done through executive order also that will affect our public lands. And and I know a lot of people who are really afraid about what's going to happen with regard to EPA. I mean, this is somebody who openly said he was a climate denier, didn't believe in the science of it.
That's
So
right.
does that mean that there's going to be a systematic dismantling of the EPA? And I mean, they don't just regulate, climate change related things. There's also clean water. There's a lot of other toxic substance issues that they deal with. So, I mean, I think that's really frightening a lot of people about where that's going to be heading.
Right. Merritt, we hear this a lot. And Laura's expressing things we hear on Facebook and all over. The last 2 days have been, or 3 days now, have been, crazy that way. Are we more afraid than we should be in some ways? Should we just sit back and wait and see what happens? Because I'm saying that's not in the context. We had last night, as we sit here, protests in the streets of Albuquerque, as well as around the country, saying, this is not our president. Do you know what I mean? But then we have other people saying, let's give him a chance. Let's give the benefit of the doubt. We have the current president, saying that very same thing. Are we too nervous at this point?
I think absolutely, and I think the point made earlier that the Trump who campaigned will not be the Trump who is president. His message was very targeted, and he relied, as we've seen, on metadata. He had the Google, the Facebook, the financial transaction data that retailers and marketers used, and that's how he built his voter profiles, and that's how he built his message. Right. I don't see how, and I found many of his statements terribly disturbing. I just don't see, because let's go back to 7th grade civics. We've got an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch. We have checks and balances. We did not just electate. Boy, that was
like
a
that word.
Republican Freudian slip.
I hear a hashtag.
Let's make up bad words. We did not elect a dictator for life.
Right.
I mean, that the republic remains.
That's true. However, the legislative branch is also controlled by one party.
That's right.
And even though there's differences between the rank and file Republicans and members of Congress and the president-elect, they're still going to work together in terms of some general agenda items,
Right.
which have been contrary to what the Obama administration has pushed, and what a lot of people in this state have been pushing in terms of federal policies. And so we see, I think, and that's what, of course, you ask a Republican, should we be afraid? And they're going to say, no, of course not. You ask a Democrat, yes, be very afraid, is what I think. Because, and also, he gets to control who gets appointed to the Supreme Court, and how long are those justices going to hang on?
That's right. That's right. And it was a big selling point on the road.
And in terms of implications for New Mexico and New Mexicans,
Right.
we also have immigration policy.
That's right.
And it's not only, it's superimposed over this business we talked about, business and commerce, but we also have the flow of people back and forth, or actually, ironically, this is a very low time for Mexican migration to the United States, but the status of folks here, and in particular, what has been done by executive order is the DACA and DAPA programs, which on one hand gave temporary legal status to these young people who were, for all intents and purposes, Americans, but born elsewhere and are undocumented, gave them work status. Trump has identified that program as being undone, and that is something he can do through executive order.
And that's a very different situation in New Mexico, like you're saying, than Connecticut.
Well,
Absolutely.
and I think that's why we saw protests also among Chicano and Raza kids in Los Angeles.
That's right. That's right. People see what's coming, so to speak, as they say. Now, we'll be back in a few minutes with more analysis of New Mexico election results. This semester, however, students from the New Mexico Newsport, a student-run lab at UNM, have been interviewing young people about voting in 2016 elections. We asked the Newsport team to head out to the polls to see what people were saying about why voting was important to them in 2016. This is what they heard.
I think it's important to vote in every election. It's just a privilege to be an American, to have that say. So
most people my age don't really care, but for me personally, I care a lot. Like, my brother's in the military, and my dad was an immigrant and stuff. So
I'm happy I voted. I think every vote counts. Everybody says that, oh, you know, my vote doesn't count, but if you don't get out there and do it and actually try, then, you know, it's kind of worthless, but I'm glad I voted.
I mean, so many times, you know, people would justify who they're voting for based on why they're not voting for the other person. And it's like, you know, whether it's, you know, vulgar language or emails, you know, it's like the real issues really couldn't even get discussed.
I hope that it brings people back to a middle ground and makes the next ones not so polarizing and extreme, but I don't know. I don't know if it'll just make it easier for people to be extreme, or if people will take this as a lesson and try to work together and find a more compromising position.
I would love this for there to be like a media consensus about raising the standard and not just laying in the dirt for clickbait and ratings. I would just love it if we all kind of learned from how bad this felt and raised the bar.